Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to a flat pack history of Sweden. This is episode 5.
Yes, boats, bronze, and bartering. We've decided to call this episode.
Yeah, again, 3 things that are really important for this time period.
Yeah, I mean those are really the 3 B's you want in life.
Yeah, everybody wants bronze, boats, and bartering.
Yeah, but before we delve into that, I feel like we must comment on the current sort of times. Even if this is a history podcast, the present times we're living in.
Yeah, we are recording this as we record most of our episodes, a little bit in advance. So this is the 21st of March, probably about a week into London lockdown, which we're all loving because of the coronavirus. So we hope everybody's safe, or at least recovering from whatever's happening in your part of the world. Yeah, stay safe, wash your hands, etc.
Wash your hands, yeah, don't touch your face, and everything else that, people who are a lot cleverer than us when it comes to these things tell us to do, and look out for each other, help each other.
Yeah. On a much more personal note, I've recovered from my wisdom tooth removal and I can now eat solid food again, so that's great.
That is something that we're very, very happy for you. There's been a lot of mashed potato eaten over the last couple of days.
Yeah, definitely. And you've just come back from a long trip?
I've come back from a work
Swedish trip.
Yeah, a Swedish-Finnish trip, so around the northern Sweden and Finland, the area around the Tornio River. It's been nothing, unfortunately, not related to the podcast at all. More related to my day job, but it's been an absolutely wonderful trip. Saw some amazing sights and met some lovely people up north.
Yeah, and hopefully, if you've been keeping an eye on our Twitter account, you would have seen some of the cool photos that you managed to take. So yeah, that's exciting. And thank you also to everybody who's been listening so far. We've had quite a few messages on Twitter from people who've had a listen, so that's really great. We've had about 500 downloads and listens across various platforms.
I mean, that's amazing. It's, more than certainly I could have ever hoped for. So, and a thank you to people who've listened to the previous episodes, or if this is the first episode that you're finding us now, welcome, and we're absolutely delighted that people want to listen to us.
And talking about people who've been listening, thank you to Cara Di Domizio, who's been talking to us a lot on Twitter, retweeting us and all that kind of thing, and getting involved with the time travel talks. So thank you so much for that. The support's really appreciated.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and other podcasts have been getting involved as well with the communication on Twitter and giving some tips, like History of Aotearoa.
Oh yeah, the History of New Zealand podcast. Shout out to you. You do a great podcast. Really like it.
Yeah, but talking of podcasts, probably should get started today.
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
So, like all episodes, we're going to start with a Swedish phrase for the week or the episode. So this one today, I can't remember how it came up, but it was...
me neither.
Yeah, or how we picked it, but it's släng dig i väggen.
Yeah. I mean, it literally translates into English as throw yourself into a wall.
That's nice. Any particular type of wall, just a hard wall.
Yeah, not just any wall, and it's it's not meant literally. It's meant figuratively. It has nothing to do with harming yourself or others. It sort of means like get lost or take a hike. Maybe you'd say in America. If I or someone I support, we do better than our opponent, then I can say, oh wow, look at that great goal that we scored. Sling er i väggen, the other team. We're so much better. I'm better than you. Släng dig i väggen. Throw yourself into the wall. Get lost. I'm better.
Sounds excellent. I can imagine you screaming that when you're watching all the handball games back in southern Sweden. Yeah.
Certainly. And it's now time to throw ourselves into this week's episode.
Yeah, cool. Would you like to give a brief summary if you can remember what we did in the last episode?
I'll try. We learned that the Swedish Neolithic period had 3 cultures: the funnel cup culture, the pitted ware culture, and the battle axe culture. I mean, great names for the cultures. The funnel cups, they introduced farming. The pitted ware culture, they held on more to their hunter-gatherer roots. And the battle axe culture, I mean, they were the biggest and baddest of them all, and they kind of added the best bits of both, and they are around now as we enter into the Bronze Age.
We also met aurochs, those amazing monster cattle animals.
Were cool.
They were very cool. We talked about lots of different types of graves and caught up with other cultures around Europe and the Mediterranean to see what they were doing at the time as well in the Neolithic period. So there was lots of stuff we were talking about. Speaking of different cultures around the world, I think we mentioned the Pyramid of Djoser in Egypt, the very first one. Well, news, or at least, well, when I read the news, it was already a few weeks old, and so when this comes out, it's probably about.
I mean, this is a history podcast, so I feel like it's quite good. We never deliver news that are too fresh. Even our news are a little bit in the past.
Yeah, sure. So the news about this old stuff is that the Pyramid of Djoser's just reopened to the public.
Great.
Yep. It was kind of wrecked by an earthquake about 20 odd years ago, and that caused a lot of damage, which needs to be fixed. And so it took about 14 years of work with a little bit of a gap in the middle. But if you happen to be in Egypt or going to be in Egypt at any point in the future, go check it out.
Yeah. Once we can safely travel again, should be added as a public notice, then we can check out this pyramid that's just opened. But
start the Bronze Age.
Yeah, back to Sweden and back to the Bronze Age. Probably a good idea to give a brief timeline. As always, you can split these historical periods into many smaller periods. But for Sweden, there is no temple phase or what the Maltese had, or any phase or period that has a nice name to it like that. In a Swedish context, it's simply called Early Bronze Age, which is from around 1800 to 1100 BC, and Late Bronze Age, which is from around 1100 BC to 500 BC. A key thing, like with most of the stuff we've talked about so far, is that this story that we'll be telling is more about the bottom half of what's modern-day Sweden. In northern Sweden, the division of these Bronze Age periods is different than in the southern parts. The early Bronze Age culture didn't spread really into this region.
No, but the southern Swedes of the time were certainly branching out into the wider world, not just north of them in Sweden. And this really helped with a lot of things, namely with the main thing that brings the name to the period, which is bronze.
Yeah.
So the main problem with Sweden at this point is quite a big one when it comes to the Bronze Age, and that's because it had no native sources of tin, and copper deposits weren't exploited for about another 2,000 years.
Well, so here we come to straight into a very fundamental part of this history. How do you get a Bronze Age when you have no bronze?
Yeah, well, the main idea of that is getting it from other people, and from the Swedes, that's trading. So the people of the Nordic Bronze Age were really engaged in the export of amber, the material, not human beings, called amber. And this is something they had quite a lot of, and the Swedes, it's not that
Sorry.
funny.
No, that's the reason I'm laughing, is because it's really not that funny. Just in case any listener were wondering, we are talking about the sort of reddish, orangey, stone-like material called amber. Stony glass material. It's called amber. We would like to clarify that they did not trade women called amber.
No, but so they ended up, the Swedes and their Norwegian and Danish brothers, they exported all this lovely amber, and people from sort of the Baltics, modern day Estonia and that sort of area, and they got metals in return. And in fact, a lot of them ended up becoming expert metal workers once they'd received the metal themselves. So when you look at the number of metal finds from this period, the Nordic Bronze Age was perhaps the richest culture in Europe during its existence.
Yeah, I mean, copper and tin and metalworking techniques were imported into the area from Britain and South Central Europe, including Mycenaean Greece. Even the finished product, the bronze, was imported. So the first bronze swords, for example, which inspired the local population to no end, as we'll see later. They were able to do this because amber really was the gold mine of the day for Sweden. Well, I say Sweden, in fact, actually, most of it came from Jutland in modern day Denmark, so we shouldn't take the credit away from the Danes. Amber was traded to Britain, to Central Europe, and the area around Greece in return for bronze, as we said. But Swedes also gave them hides, fur, tar products, and probably even slaves. Once it had its amber, Sweden became part of a wide-ranging Bronze Age trading network.
Yeah, and we can see from this quite concise quote from Connected Histories, The Dynamics of Bronze Age Interaction and Trade, 1500 to 1100 BC, in an article in the Proceedings of Prehistoric Society by Christian Christensen and Paulina Sokovska-Duce. They go on to say, Baltic amber was craved in the eastern Mediterranean, and once South Scandinavia was able to take advantage of this situation, its wealth increased to unprecedented levels. Likewise, Cornwall possessed tins, the Carpathian region salt mines, the steppes supplied good horses, etc. In short, no region was able to maintain their social system without being part of the larger inter-regional networks that supplied the goods that everybody needed.
Yeah, and the way they did this was thanks to boats. That's crucial, boats. As a Norwegian Bronze Age researcher, Frode Kvale, says, quote, ideas, raw materials, and material culture were spread far and wide through the use of seagoing vessels. The institution of travel brought together different local groups and established networks of interaction along the coast of Scandinavia, and as such is a fundamental condition and premise for the Nordic Bronze Age. So there we have it. Seafaring trade was the main reason for the start of and the very raison d'etre for the entire period. There are a number of identifiable traces of this trade that we can see still.
Yep, for one, it's possible to identify where the individual examples of copper and tin came from to make the bronze pieces that are found in the archaeological record. All throughout Scandinavia at the start of the Bronze Age, before 1300 BCE, different regions had different providers of copper for their objects. So Denmark and Sweden seem to have relied on maritime trade along the North Sea to Weser, or perhaps even the Rhine River, leading directly to the South German cultures of the time, which themselves had connections to the Italian Alps.
Yeah, I mean, there are people such as Professor Johan Ling at the University of Gothenburg that have dedicated their entire career to researching this period. So, we're not going to pretend that we can do the same level of justice as they have. But I've read a couple of Professor Ling's articles for this episode, and the takeaway from it all is that the main source of copper for Scandinavians seems to have been the Italian Alps, with about 70% of the goods coming from there. Mainly swords, in Professor Ling's case, having Italian copper in it.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the copper was sort of bought in the shop directly from Italy from one Swedish sailor or trader and brought home. One of the areas being looked at a lot in the scholarship recently, it seems, is the links between South Britain, Wessex, and South Scandinavia. That's because there's a concentration of amber objects in Wessex from 1950, or not 1950, 1950 BCE to 1500. And these include plates, amber beads, and cups. And amazingly, the largest concentration of amber objects is found in the inland area of Wessex, which has Stonehenge as the centre. And there's specific rock art that is only found at Stonehenge in Britain and Skåne in Sweden. So out of all of Europe, this rock art appears in these two places that were also trading together. So that shows you the interconnectedness of these two regions. And interestingly, Skåne and Wessex are the only two regions in Northern Europe that have a substantial number of axe images from the period in question. And so there's all of this stuff comes from amazing articles that look at long distance trade from these two regions, and it's all out there for you. And so we have quoted and will quote, or at least secondhand reference a lot of things that are all out there. And if you do want to read more, do let us know, and we can share where we've got some of our good research from.
Yeah, and through this research, it seems that we've found that there were connections between southern England and Skåne before you and I met.
Yeah.
We don't represent the first of those connections.
No, perhaps not.
There were the Bronze Age equivalent of us, perhaps.
Yeah, not doing podcasts, but doing their own. Maybe there's a series of rock art somewhere that we haven't discovered called A Battle Axe History of Skåne and Wessex.
That a Skåne-Wessex couple maybe created together. This is pure speculation now, and I should move on. Closer to home for us, in terms of where we live, not in the podcast, we have the Dover boat. A boat found near Dover, surprisingly.
Yep, they're always handily named.
This is a boat that is around 10 to 13 meters long. They've only excavated 9 meters of it, and it would have been a cargo boat from the 1500s BCE. So perfect timing for what might have been coming to southern Scandinavia to hoover up all that lovely amber.
Yep, can't stop me now. I'm going to get all the amber.
The boat would have needed just over a dozen crew members to travel, and would have been able to carry about 3.5 US tons of cargo. Now that is a lot of bronze and amber.
Yeah, that is a lot. That's more than I can carry. So, yeah.
Even though you are very good at carrying the shopping home, even you couldn't carry all of that.
No, I would need a boat. Some indirect evidence of the levels of trade going on in the Bronze Age come from the Bronze Age period in the Mediterranean. And this is particularly in Greece, in and around the Aegean. There are a number of shipwrecks from this area too, and they include a particularly impressive one smack bang in the middle of the Nordic Bronze Age.
Yeah, this is so interesting. This is what's called the Uluburun, pardon my pronunciation, Uluburin Shipwreck, found 6 kilometers off the coast of Kos in southwestern Turkey, about 100 kilometers or so east of the island of Rhodes. The spectacularly preserved artifacts make up what the historian Cheryl Ward calls, quote, perhaps the best known and largest assembly of evidence from late Bronze Age trade. There have been many studies of this ship, and they've found 15,000 artifacts. And that's not counting the 85,000 ceramic, glass, and stone beads. Like that is just so much stuff.
That is a lot of beads. I mean, yeah. I pity the poor intern who had to count all those beads. That's...
1 bead, 2 beads, 8,500 beads.
Yep. Many beads. So that's why I love reading about all of these artifacts and shipwrecks and sort of the case studies, I guess, from this period, because I would have never have guessed before reading about the Uluburin Shipwreck that there would have been so much stuff on just one ship.
Listen, if you're out there right now as a junior researcher or scientist on one of these projects, if you're counting beads or fragments of bone or something, I'd just like to say we respect you so much, because that must be time-consuming work that sort of lays the foundation of the understanding of history that we have.
Yeah. What I find most interesting about all the stuff that these amazing researchers have come up with is that perhaps 9 or 10 different cultures are represented by what was found on the wreck, and all around the Mediterranean and beyond. So a Turkish archaeologist, Chimal Pulak, has said that it might have been loaded up and sent on its final journey from Cyprus due to the amount of large amounts of Cypriot copper that they found on board.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the daughter of a merchant seaman, and I mean, a 15-meter cedar ship certainly isn't similar in size to today's cargo ships, but it is most definitely their ancestor. This ship could carry around 20 tons of cargoes and stores, plus it had 24 stone anchors that weighed 3 ton in total.
Yeah, so for a bit of a fun comparison that I've done, that amount of cargo means it could carry the weight of about 12 European family cars or about 7 American pickup trucks worth of cargo, which is a lot.
It's essentially the world's first car transporter in terms of its cargo ability.
Yeah, and the most amazing thing, as we said, is probably the cargo itself. This list goes on forever. I think the Wikipedia page for the Uluburin Shipwreck has copied a lot of the stuff from some of these articles. So, for example, it's got elephant and hippo ivory. It's got silver jewelry, ingots, bullion, gold jewelry and bullion, tens of tons of copper, a ton of tin, coloured glass, ostrich eggs, and amber.
Aye, there we go, the amber. More evidence of Swedes and Danes and a wider Baltic network spreading their lovely amber around. And if the amber is as highly valued as these other items that's in the cargo, that would mean that the Swedes were getting similar sort of wealth back in exchange.
Yeah, and one thing to mention before we look into how this wealth was generated and collected back in Sweden is that some of the people I've read about in the research for this, including a guy called Van der Noort, have said that I think a lot of this trade was done by people travelling the whole distance themselves, rather than relying on sort of a chain of exchange. So that might be true for Britain to Skåne with the Wessex link, but might not have been the easiest for ancient Swedes to head all the way to Cyprus. So I think, like all things, there's probably certainly 50-50.
Because of this, we can see how the Nordic communities were really tapping into this amazing network of trade, and it ended up changing society in so many ways. It led to the creation of a Nordic lifestyle that was based on Mycenaean templates. They were introduced to new habits. We know what it's like when you travel and you pick up new things and you come back home. And these Bronze Age Swedes, they were picking up new habits like shaving and sitting on camp stools.
Hey, shaving. Yeah, that's good. I like shaving. And the traders themselves didn't, as we said, they didn't necessarily go the whole way to Greece. So they would have been picking up habits and traditions from southern Germany and northern Italy, which both appear to be a little bit of a hub for this trade.
Yeah. For some people, at least, the great influence came from controlling or being involved in this trade. This is found in the rich archaeological records from this period. But then again, to be fair, for most people, bronze had few really far-reaching impacts. I mean, everyday tools and weapons were still made of stone and bone and wood, and peasant farming was still the center of almost everyone's life. I mean, that's the way it is throughout history. The area under cultivation increased. There was more farmland, and later in the period, there were more intensive practices introduced, and that included crop rotation and more conscious manuring of fields. This helped, actually. You needed more conscious manuring, which is a phrase I love, by the way. I love the idea of conscious manuring.
It's better than unconscious.
Unconscious manuring is the worst. You don't want to just fling that all over the field. You want to be conscious of how you spread it. Anyway, they needed to be conscious of their manuring because actually the climate, which had been quite sort of nice and Mediterranean, it was getting worse in Sweden during this period.
Not horrendous. It's not a day after tomorrow type change, but it's becoming more what it is like today, which is colder. And in the later part of the Bronze Age, what could be called small villages were beginning to spring up in Sweden, and these contained small clusters of families. And this is when families became the primary group units of life, helped by those Neolithic ideas of ownership that we mentioned previously. Families became the group that were organizing work and social life. They lived in elongated rectangular houses built with walls of turf or even interwoven sticks and with dried mud and clay thrown in as well. And sometimes the interior was split into a lot more areas than you would necessarily today. You've got storage, living, work, and animal areas inside these houses. So that's lovely. A lot of them seem to have been arranged in sort of 3 aisles, like a bit like a supermarket or something. And they were found between, right in this period, 1400 to 500 BCE. And they range in size from either, 13 to 25 meters long to 3 to 7 meters wide. So some of those big ones are big.
That's a nice house to have, even if you have to share it with your cow. Pig. Work was also becoming increasingly specialized for some people. This had begun in the Neolithic period to an extent, especially with farming, but now we have a small group of artisans who learned to smelt and cast and work the copper and tin and bronze, and in particular gold. And these people may have held important places in society, taking charge of the production of all this material that they're importing from elsewhere in Europe. And this led to wider changes in society.
Yeah, and another one of those specializations was the sailors. You can't really trade very much or reliably if all your sailors keep dying or falling in or getting lost at sea or smashing into rocks. You'd lose all of your amber and your bronze and the knowledge and the contacts with the outside world. You'd never be able to find your way back to Wessex if all your sailors kept dying every trip. So these guys really were the backbone of the entire community in terms of the trading, but potentially a bit like today, maybe a bit forgotten in the background as the community keeps plodding along without them when they're away for long periods of time. But one of the things that did change was the status and prestige of the goods of the elite. So these were the few things that they did have to show off their position in society, where they could collect all these bronze goods to show how, hey, I'm the great guy in the village, look at me.
Yeah, you need that physical symbol to show who you are.
Yeah, and this is quite important for all the evidence that we're looking at, because bronze weapons and jewelry, some of them with gold bits on them, are the most primary artifacts for this period, hence the Bronze Age name. And they were clearly used as a means of reward as well, to display their status, and were used in cult practices as well. The wealth of the few is clear from the objects left in graves and what was probably offerings, and especially as we push into the end of the period. The style of the graves and how many are found are also great indicators of this quite wide fluctuation in society. But as always, we'll have a grave section, but we'll probably talk about that more next week.
Yeah, we're saving the graves for next week.
And when we're talking about these people getting specialized jobs, even building the boats, not even sailing them, it would have taken a lot of time and effort. And it's been estimated that it was anything between 250 to 600 days worth of work to build the Dover boat, for example. So that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a specialization. That's not something you do after you've finished working on your farm for 12 hours a day and you go and do that in an evening or so. Most likely, these were people who specialized in building boats all the time, and then their food was provided for them by someone else who worked their farm.
Yeah, although if anyone has seen NCIS, Gibbs builds a boat in his basement, so he comes home from solving all these US Navy crimes and then builds a boat in his basement. So Maybe. I doubt that this is what was the case now, though.
Anywho,
Yeah.
with this introduction of wealth in society comes social status hierarchies. In the Bronze Age, we see structural societal hierarchies develop, classes, if you like, a class system, where we've got a rich upper class that, like Chris said, can import these snazzy bronze things from abroad and ornate themselves and their clothes. And this new upper class, they were probably rich farmers or tradesmen who earned their wealth from farming and seafaring. And then we have a lower class that had none of the bronze bling and toiled for the upper class. There'd always been people who were better off than others. That's not in itself new, but it is during the Bronze Age that we can start to see structural differences between people because of wealth and prosperity. And that's probably because now we have a settled village society with trade, farming, and craftsmanship that allowed for some to gain and for others to lose. An environment had developed that allowed for some to be masters and for others to be slaves, quite literally.
Yeah, and that's one of the fundamental things that comes with living on farms and not moving around all the time. You can't collect 25 gold swords if you're carrying them all around with you as a hunter-gatherer. You just can't do that. Whereas if you've got a farm, you can have a whole part of your house that is just for your great gold sword. So that's just how life has begun to change. And this isn't... We're talking about owning things and people. We've got to not forget that this is a time where it's completely normal that some people own other people. And that'll be a case for a large part of Swedish history, sadly. But speaking of things that have become increasingly normal, we have seen a rise, perhaps, in violence during this time.
Yeah, I mean, violence is nothing new. People who lived in Sweden before this period had also been violent. And if you ask me, I think violence is probably something innate to us as a species. But that's a topic for a different podcast, really. What we see during the Bronze Age is how this hierarchical society is controlled by using threats and by using violence. Material wealth and the ability to exert violence meant a higher status. Or, to put it bluntly, it's all about that shiny bronze sword and who could wield it.
Yeah, archaeologists have found evidence of this type of violence all over Europe. Loads of swords have been found buried, even graves of wealthy people, but also in what looks like ritual sacrifices. The skeletons and bones that have been found also speak of this violence. The injuries that these skeletons have show that people didn't always die a peaceful death from natural causes, and far from it, really.
No, definitely. One example of a beaten skeleton like this from the period is that of a man. He was found in the early 1950s near Granhammar, which is not far from Stockholm, just north of Stockholm. Granhammarsmannen, or the man from Granhammar, as he's known, he is often credited as being Sweden's first murder victim.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I mean...
Not cool for him, but...
No, but cool that we have Sweden's first murder victim. I mean, very, very much most likely there had been murders before this. Like, that's the case. Granhammarsmannen gets the credit since he's one of the earliest and best preserved ones that we've found.
And because we found him, we've been able to investigate how he died. So I guess this could be welcome to CSI, Bronze Age Sweden.
Yeah.
I might put a bit of theme music in there.
Oh, please do. If we can clear it for what's it called?
Not the real CSI music, our own music. So go theme tune. CSI, Bronze Age Sweden.
Hi.
Hello.
Well, this man lost his life in a bloody axe battle sometime in the century 800 BCE. His murderer or murderers we don't know if there were many, literally hacked the left part of his face off.
That does tend to kill people.
Yeah, if you lose half of your face, that is that might mean that you bleed to death. It's so violent, and they used an axe that hasn't been found. So we still hasn't found the murder weapon in this Bronze Age murder case.
Well, that's step one crossed off. That's disappointing. I don't think we're gonna solve this case.
No, we're struggling. The man from Garnhammer, was then probably thrown into a marsh, which helps explain why his remains are so well preserved. When he died, he was in his 50s and he had seriously worn out teeth, probably had a worse toothache than you've been having from your wisdom tooth removal.
Ouch.
Yeah, he had a chronic infection in his jaw and signs of repetitive stress injuries in his right arm.
So maybe they were just trying to help him with his toothache by cutting half his jaw off. Maybe they were the first world's worst dentists.
It could be. I don't think so. I think these things that we've found on his skeleton tells us is really how what life was like for an ordinary Swede in the Bronze Age. I mean, when you got to the age of 50, you were pretty much worn out. You had these injuries and strains on your body from the work you had to do. Your teeth were rotting, and you would you were worn out. But that doesn't justify you being killed.
No. So what else do we know about him apart from all this?
Well,
rubbish health.
The injuries on his skeleton suggest that he did try to defend himself from his attacker.
Or dentist.
Yeah, the interchangeable, really. Forgive us, any dentists listening.
No, my dentist was amazing. Thank you, dentist. I'm sorry.
But the Garnhammer's man did have defend wounds, so he did try to defend himself. We obviously don't know what the motive behind the murder was, but this goes to show that we're now in a society where stuff like this happened. I mean, Garnhammer's man, and he most likely wouldn't have been the only murderer. What happened to him shows us how violent, and not just randomly violent, but deliberately violent, life in Bronze Age Sweden could be.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. We could seriously do a CSI Bronze Age thing on this guy, but that's not really what we're here for. So read about it yourself. I don't know if there's too much stuff in English. I think it's a lot in Swedish. But yeah, it's cool. It just shows you how this violence and the first real life historical murder case came to Sweden. CSI, Bronze Age, Sweden. Yeah, so tough times really in Sweden, but we do know a lot of what was going on in the rest of the world. We've been talking a lot about what was happening in Greece, so I think probably time for a little bit of our what's happening the rest of the world section to end this episode.
Exactly, and by the way, we are still looking for a good name for this section where we sort of take a step back from what's going on in Sweden to put it in a greater context of what's going on in the world. So if you have a nice name for this section, then please let us know. Like you said, Chris, we have spent a bit of time talking about Greece in this episode, and that is perhaps the archetypical Bronze Age civilization or collection of civilizations. The Greek Bronze Age was much longer than the Swedish one and split into a number of island and mainland civilizations, so to speak. In fact, there were three distinct areas: mainland, Aegean Island, and Cretan Bronze Ages, and they're known as Helladic, Minoan, and Cycladic timelines.
Yeah, they were a bit different from Sweden, that's for sure, but that's possibly to be a bit expected. Different weather, different styles of living. The period is known all around the world, really, for its palatial complexes and widespread trade. Perhaps the most famous and impressive was the Minoan culture. I did quite a few courses on them at university and had loads of really interesting lectures on them. And it's really hard to summarize.
Try, Chris.
Yeah.
Be brief.
Yeah, just a few paragraphs. But the Minoans were at their peak from around 2700 to 1450 BCE. And they had a little bit of a wobble and a decline. Things started going a bit wrong. And eventually around 1100 BCE, they all fell apart. And this is the time when the battle axes are starting to come a thing back in Sweden. So the Minoans had already mastered bronze and everything that went with it well before the battle axes even.
Way ahead of Sweden.
Yeah, and they were so far ahead of Sweden that the Minoans could probably be called the first real advanced civilization in Europe, in quote marks. You can still find their massive building complexes, amazing artwork, first stabs at writing, and of course evidence for all the trade. The palace at Knossos is probably what they're best known for, and it's usually called Europe's first city as well.
Yeah, I mean, the size of Knossos is unbelievable. If we are talking about Swedish, like compared to Swedish concepts, in the first palace period, which was around 2000 BCE, the area of the palace contained anything up to 18,000 people. But when it reached its height, the palace and the surrounding city, real city, reached up to 100,000 people. And that's shortly after 1700 BCE. So that's a fair bit more than Sweden at the time. I recommend that you read up on this if you have time.
Yeah, more than the whole country. There was only a couple of episodes we were talking about at the same time. Sweden was saying, oh, there might have been 20,000 people in the whole country. And then, a short / middling boat ride away, there's a city with a palace that is 5 times bigger than that, which is just amazing. So please do, read about Knossos and the Minoans. And there's loads of crazy stuff, like they used to maybe jump over boars and balls that would ride at you, a bit like the Spanish, what do they say?
Bullfighting.
Yeah, what do they say? They say
the bull run.
Yeah, but when they do the woof, they whip.
Ole,
yeah, and
wow,
yeah, stuff.
Good times in Knossos.
Yeah, but they would jump over them rather than get out of the way. So that was crazy. Supposedly, there's lots of art about all that stuff, but. Yeah, you can see why this palace had all the specialists able to make the bronze swords and artifacts that have come into the archaeological record in Sweden. They really knew how to do it.
Yeah.
Back to the general style of society in Greece at the time, they were palace economies. So it meant in practice that most of the goods, the people, and the wealth was all collected centrally at the palace and then distributed out to the rest of the population. This is probably because the elites in the palace thought that they were best at doing this distribution themselves and didn't trust anybody else, which is probably fair, considering they were just about inventing writing. Not everybody's going to know how to do it, and all that sort of thing. Keeping records and giving it out and distributing it seems to make sense. Cool. And can't really spend much more time on this for good reason, but there seems to be, at the height of the Swedish Bronze Age, there was an event, or probably more likely a big general shift that happened that changed the Mediterranean cultures for good.
Yeah, this is called the Late Bronze Age Collapse.
Dramatic.
Sounds very dramatic. It took place around 1100 BCE, and Robert Drews, in his The End of the Bronze Age, he sums it up in a sentence saying, quote, "Within a period of 40 or 50 years, at the end of the 13th and beginning of the 12th century, almost every significant city in the Eastern Mediterranean world was destroyed, many of them never to be occupied again." So the palace economy of the Aegean that had served the people so well and produced all this amazing cities that Chris were talking about and all the other great stuff, they completely fell apart. And we ended up with small villages that became their own separate culture. And this is known as the Greek Dark Ages.
Yeah, and this was such a big event that you can apparently even see this in the Swedish archaeological record. So beginning before this and after this, there's less Greek bronze coming and making all its way up to Sweden, and the trade networks were disrupted. But ultimately, this didn't make too much of a difference to Sweden because they still had another 500, 600 years left of their Bronze Age, still trading with Britain and Wessex and Northern Europe. So it didn't ruin Sweden as much as it completely destroyed the Greek way of life at the time.
Interesting. So then we get to around 500 BCE when we are reaching the Iron Age.
Yep. So that's the Iron Age, but we won't be jumping into that just yet. One of the key things about the Bronze Age in Sweden is all the great rock art that we've sort of kept at arm's length for this episode because it's so cool and we want to go into it properly. There's painted stones that are entering into the environment in huge amounts. So there's that and all the graves, more graves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so delighted to hear that there's more graves, but we're saving that till next week. So next week, we'll delve deeper into the cultures of the Bronze Age in Sweden and talk more about those two main things, those two main traces of the Bronze Age that we still see physically around us today. The graves and the rock paintings.
Yeah, that's this week over. We've talked a lot about Bronze Age trade and how they got all this bronze from all around Europe from their crazy boats. And Europe really first began its own huge network of trade and how everybody was giving ideas and things together. The shaving coming from Greece all the way to Sweden, and
and like I said, not just the shaving, but really significant societal shifts in this period, and how families were structured, how people lived, the increase of violence, very violent teeth removals, perhaps in the first murder case, which turned into a violent jaw removal, face removal.
Yeah, and it's just how this has changed a lot of, I was going to say Greek society, a lot of welcome to the history of Greece. That is also a podcast. I think there's a Hellenic podcast as well.
We'll leave the Greek history to them, and we stay focused on the Swedish one. But it's nice to make comparisons like that because no country, no culture exists in isolation. History is dependent on what happened elsewhere at the same time.
Yep. So join us next time for more Bronze Age culture and graves and all that sort of thing. Yeah. And as always, please do give us a review on iTunes or Podbean or wherever you find us. We're on Pocket Casts, Spotify, Stitcher, all these amazing places. Please do let us know how you found us as well.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, and where you're listening from.
Yeah.
We're on Twitter at Flatpack Sweden, and we're on Facebook with the same name. If you want to send an email, you can reach us on flatpackhistorysweden@gmail.com. That's in one word, flatpackhistorysweden@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and but for now, goodbye from us. Continue your social distancing.
Yeah, continue. Just behave like Nordic people do. Don't no kissing on the cheek. No, just wave at each other from a distance.
Yeah.
Hej då.
Bye.